We're going to move to next panel, regional views on Open RAN activity and outlook. We have 4 terrific speakers joining us. If I could ask each of you to come to the stage right now. So we have, I'll tell you what we're going to do a little bit differently this time. Let's just have everyone introduce themselves, just so everybody in the audience know who's who. Let's start here with Iain at ATIS. Iain, please.
Hi, everybody. So my name's Iain Sharp. I work for ATIS, the principal technologist. So ATIS is the North American organizational partner in 3GPP, and we're a regional SDO. And I guess we've recently become very involved in topics related to ORAN through a couple of routes. One thing that many of you will be aware of is that the US government, particularly NTIA, which is the White House, is promoting ORAN as a strategic technology to, I guess, diversify and improve the RAN market. And we've been creating what's called the minimum viable profile of Open RAN, and this is a profile of the Open RAN specs to meet the requirements of the North American operators to really deploy Open RAN across the North American marketplace and to give developers a baseline for that. The other aspect that we're working on is to bring the ORAN specifications into North American regional standards by publishing them as ATIS standards. And I think this is interesting because this is the same thing that we do for 3GPP. So this is bringing ORAN into equivalent status to 3GPP for the North American marketplace. So that's really the kind of focus of what we're doing in Open RAN right now, and I think it's kind of very relevant to the topic of this session.
Good stuff, and I'll ask you in a moment, Iain, to comment maybe on what we just heard, but just before we move on, just give us a feel for what's the kind of intensity of work on ORAN within ATIS and the community that you serve?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, the MVP project has been very intense. So this was undertaken in less than a year, and we had a lot of involvement and very detailed technical discussions from really all the players in North America, bringing their technical experts. So it's a big topic, and there's definite, I would say, real commitment to the topic amongst our members.
Good stuff. Thank you, Iain. Yeah, let's introduce yourself. And
thank you very much, Gabriel. Happy to be here. Pleasure to be here. Iain Ellsberger, Director General of ETSI. I think we're here to discuss the regional views on Open RAN activity and outlook. I think from an ETSI point of view, although we are a European standards organization, one of the 3, we're actually quite global in our activities. We have a global impact in everything we do. We have 900 members from 65 countries across 5 continents. So everything we do have a global aspect. We have a global participation in all the specification work that we're doing. And when it comes to ORAN, we have a cooperation agreement with ORAN Alliance. We have adopted 7 of the ORAN specifications through the ETSI public of the PAS process, publicly available specification process. That does not mean that we sort of rubber stamp those specifications. We're actually going through, looking through them, reviewing them in our technical committees, providing comments back to ORAN Alliance, and by that improving the quality of the work and also sort of helping ORAN Alliance to get a bit more global recognition of the specifications that has been developed. So this is an ongoing process. I think it started in 2022, if I recall right, so before my term as Director General. And I think it's sort of from an ORAN Alliance point of view that really helps to sort of secure that we have a wider engagement from also the ETSI community of experts to help sort of to improve the work of those specifications. So I think I stopped there sort of as an introduction, and then we can continue.
Sure. Okay, good stuff. Let's move on to Dr. DaeJung Kim from TTA.
Yeah. My name is DaeJung Kim, working for TTA. TTA is a Korea unique ICT standardization development organization, and also just like ETSI and ATIS, TTA is also a 3GPP 3GPP organizational partners, one of the organizational partners. Actually, at the last year, we have signed between the ORAN Alliance and TTA to adopt the ORAN specification. Today, I would like to explain the Korean ORAN standardization and the policy and R&D and industry activities nowadays. Thank you.
And from Japan, we have, lost it now, Shimada-san, please.
Yeah, thank you. Let me first thank you for this opportunity. I believe that this is our first time to be here from the as a government representative from the Japanese government. I'm really appreciate this opportunity to share our views about the Open RAN. And I want to share the current update of the governmental collaboration and the public-private collaboration because I'm only one person from the government in this session. And the Japanese government is making importance on the deployment of the Open RAN to the, not only in the domestic market, but also to the globally, because we need to secure, we need to have secure, trusted, resilient network, especially by utilizing the benefit of the Open RAN. And in Japanese government, we specified the policy goal, the deployment of the support of the deployment of the Open RAN globally as a national goal in aspect of the not only national security, but also in the aspect from the viewstand of the economic security. We need to have a more resilient supply chain and more vendor diversification. We are now tackling with this kind of policy goal under the collaboration with like-minded countries like US, and Australia, UK, and also with Korea. And I want to, we did conducting some pilot project in globally. So in the later, I will introduce our current initiative for creating the public-private partnership in the open deployment. Thank you.
So Shimada-san, let's stay with you in Japan for a moment. If I understood correctly, it's explicit government industrial policy to promote Open RAN in Japan for, I think you mentioned, security and resiliency, but also, if I understand, to promote the business of Japanese tech companies exporting abroad. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct, but we don't seek this goal just for Japanese private sector, but also the economic prosperity in our region, not only in the Asia-Pacific region, but also in the globally. So, well, of course, we more than welcome if the Japanese private sector gets the profit in the global market, but the Japanese government doesn't think that this is only one policy goal. We need to, we would like to make a more contribution to create secure, trusted, resilient, and digital infrastructure situation in the globally. So we need to have a more public-private partnership among the like-minded countries.
Okay, thank you. Dr. DaeJung Kim, could you tell us a bit about the ORAN or Open RAN activity in Korea among your community, your members and contributors? What's going on? Is it, from the outside, it looks like it's a kind of a 6G story largely, but please enlighten us.
Yeah, actually, first I would like to talk about at the time of the 5G standardization. At that time, at the beginning time of the 5G standardization, at that time the 3GPP, some members wanted to propose to make some frontal interface between the low layer split between the RU and DU at that time, but the 3GPP didn't make some work item, and just at that time, after that, around 2019, at that time, in Korea, early adoption, early deployment of the 5G. At the time, the TTA members like SK Telecom and KT and Korean operators wanted to make some initial spec for the frontal interface. At that time, TTA make initial version of the frontal interface, some sort of initial O-RAN spec. After that, maybe that kind of a moment is a critical moment for the establishment of the O-RAN alliance. After that, last year we made a MOU between the TTA and O-RAN alliance. We need to seek this global harmonization in global harmonization point of view. And also that from the last year, the Korea operators like SK Telecom and KT, SK Telecom is now aggressively investing or studying and some R&D project in collaboration with 10 global manufacturers. And also Korea Telecom nowadays is provide some pilot service in Jeju Island. And also Samsung is also in collaborate with Vodafone like the global operators. And also Korea government last 2023 announced some open NAN policy plan to promote, encourage O-RAN specification. And also, many R&D projects is now on progress in Korea. In Korea government funding to the Korean industry to encourage some study and facilitate the O-RAN specification.
Thank you. We're going to have some time for questions in a moment, so get all those ready, and also microphone person as well, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to land this one on you because you're such a cultured and expert speaker. I'm sure you can handle it. One of the things that occurs to me here is we're getting from the prior panel as well, we have a kind of lots of moving parts going on. So you have 3GPP specifications. You have O-RAN coming in and essentially filling gaps is one way of putting it. And then you have all that coming back to ETSI, to MIA and TTG, all these different agencies and ATIS. So we're kind of going sort of, it's almost from the outside, it looks like we've got a situation of things going around in circles a bit. It's 3GPP, it's back out to O-RAN, it's back into the members that make up 3GPP. It's kind of confusing, right? Is there some way of just maybe streamlining things a little bit? I don't know.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. It's a little bit fragmented at the moment, and then of course also if you sort of introduce the O-RAN specifications in all the regional specification or standards bodies, you will create fragmentation. You have the risk of creating regional versions of the O-RAN specifications, and I don't think that is sort of beneficial from a global market point of view. If you look at the 3GPP model, that is very, very successful. It's a partnership between the regional SDOs in the different parts of the world, so China, Japan, South Korea, India, Europe and US. And I think that is really a successful model, because then you make the commitment that you do the technical specification work in 3GPP, and then you automatically transpose the results into the regional standards bodies and being issued as regional standards. And part of the 3GPP MOU is that you commit that you're not going to make any changes to the 3GPP specifications. Technology development is, and especially technology innovation, if you want to have the best technologies developed, it has to be a global effort. There is not one single region in the world that can be self-sufficient in any technology, so it has to be a global collaboration. And the 3GPP model guarantees that. It's really a global joint effort to develop the best technology for mobile systems. And I think if O-RAN would like to try to strive to get global standards and a sort of a global effort, maybe that is the model to start to consider. So I think that would be my view on how to sort of streamline this a bit and secure that we have a good setup.
Yeah, Iain.
Yeah, well, I wanted to comment a little bit. I mean, I guess if you look at this historically, O-RAN came in with a quite disruptive mindset to try and do things in a different way to the way that 3GPP had worked and to, I guess, address what was seen as some incomplete aspects of what 3GPP had done. And I think they were quite successful, actually, in terms of taking a different approach and bringing new aspects like open source in that maybe hadn't been well addressed in 3GPP. But at the same time, it's taken them a while to achieve the same quality of specification that 3GPP normally aspires to, let's put it that way. And I think it's only really now we're talking into the era of real multi-vendor interop for Open RAN that you're really seeing the focus in Open RAN shifting towards having very clearly defined specifications in a way that 3GPP would aspire to. And I think that there is actually then, we are in a convergence process between those two organizations in that sense, in as much as I think they have much more common interest in the specification work than they used to. I think there is much clearer understanding of the role of open source from the 3GPP side than there used to be. And I think that will feed into, for example, the workshop that Ulrich and other people have been talking about, where perhaps we're going to have some kind of joint roadmap, or at least a common understanding of a roadmap that maybe wasn't there at the beginning and is coming into play now.
I think that's what struck me from the panel is the opportunity is to kind of get a little ahead rather than have two phases, is actually align whatever the terminology, I'm sure the specific terms, but the work split was one term I heard. Whatever that is, to make sure that the timelines are somehow synchronized and seems like a pretty good way to look. Let me, Iain, the thing you just mentioned, I'll let you start, but then Jan will come down if the topic's got legs. On the very first panel of the day, we heard from David Kinsey from the O-RAN software community. I don't know who is still here, but I wonder if you could talk a bit about how the relationship between standards groups, such as yourselves, and open source development is working, because certainly there's technology is being developed in open source and kind of imported in, but there's different license requirements, SLAP, I can forget what he called it now, SCCL, David can elaborate, I can't even remember what that means now, but standards collaborations, copyright license for everyone who didn't hear. Put you on the spot and Jan and work down. Is that a good topic for me to ask you about, I suppose, to start with?
I mean, I don't know the specific license that's being produced in O-RAN Alliance, but perhaps I'll talk in general, right? I mean, I think one of the things that's a major discontinuity compared to maybe where we were at the beginning of 5G is that more and more standards work is electronic deliverables that are designed to be built directly into software or can be consumed by software processes. And when I started the industry, we were very much about editing text, and now we're much more about editing machine-readable formats. And I think that from my point of view, I guess as an SDO, a lot of the requirements there are about having the tools and the knowledge and indeed the licenses to allow those things to move forward. Because the structures that we have in place for producing text documents are not necessarily the best structures for producing XML or other machine-readable things. And I think all SDOs are really in the process of making that adaptation. And we see that in 3GPP, where there is definitely, in the groups where it's relevant, there is definitely much more tooling and much more process around those software-type deliverables, which then allow it to connect much more directly into the open source community. So I think that's where I see things going. Perhaps where there is a bit more of a gap is the feedback from the open source back into the standards process, because I don't typically see a lot of open source developers sitting in standards development organizations. But they are definitely learning things that should really be fed back into the standards process. So how we connect the opposite direction, I'm not so sure, and maybe that's where we need to be focusing our future efforts.
Before I come to Iain, it strikes me as quite a big ask for any SDO to take on board, the idea of editing or implementing, designing code versus text. I mean, to someone who's outside of your world, you go into 3GPP, and I know there's a couple of people here, but it looks kind of archaic, right? There's spreadsheets, there's this, there's that, there's Word documents, which isn't really modern network technology production, not really. It seems like a big ask on you guys to actually skill up and tool up.
Yeah, and it's multidimensional, and it's cultural, and it's generational as well, right? I mean, I think that in my ideal world, I would require, all standards peak delegates to at least have some familiarity with the kind of GitHub type tools that software developers use and the kind of languages that software developers express requirements in. We're not there yet, but I think the people who are younger people coming into the standards process tend to have been trained much more in that set of tools, and for them it's a much more natural thing to use. So I think that we will move in that direction, but maybe we need to have some training for people who have been long-standing people in the standards process as to how to get up to speed with that stuff. I mean, maybe there's something, this is something that we could think about as SDOs.
Indeed, yeah, and I think I fully agree with what you said, Iain, but also to complement a little bit on that, I mean, ETSI is maybe one step ahead in this, because we have fully realized that in the modern world, you do sort of normal text-based standards, but you also have to complement that with software development under what license, etc. That is different from case to case. And you also have to complement that with in-drop testing. And in ETSI, we actually we're a little bit unique as an SDO, because we offer all those three components in our standardization process. So we do the normal text standards. We have software development groups that are developing open source or software development for specific features to demonstrate the implementability of the standard. And then we also have a very big plug test program where you can get together and do in-drop testing of different implementations of the standard to really demonstrate that the standard is in-droppable. And we see that sort of when we now look in the cybersecurity space and cyber resilience standardization that we're doing, we have those requirements coming from the European Commission that we have to include open source and software development as part of the standardization process. So we are fully meeting that demand, and we have those capabilities in-house with all the tooling and work methods, etc. So I think we are sort of already working in this direction. We also have a very good collaboration with Linux Foundation, where we do joint work, and also we have sort of discussions on how to do joint work in relation to Cyber Resilience Act, because we have to do the operating system for those type of implementations. And Linux Foundation will most likely sort of provide the software components of that. So yeah, I mean,
that's a good example of a sort of
it's a good example, yeah. So we are moving in that direction, and ETSI have all the tools in place.
Yeah, okay. Well, before we move down, I wonder if we might bring David in. I apologize, I'm sort of jumping on you in the audience there, but there's a microphone right behind you if you fancy it. I wondered if either give us some sort of global comments on what you've heard, or even specifically address the point that Iain at ATIS made about how software developers can feedback, this doesn't work, how they suspect it doesn't work, or, how they can now actually be part of the ongoing development.
Yeah, we discussed this in ORAN about how do you do the feedback loop. It doesn't work without a feedback loop. The whole purpose of being able to modify the SDO's output is because if you find a bug, the software doesn't wait for the whole standards revolution to come around for the fix. They need to do it so that their build will move forward. And so it allows for that correction. It also, in ORAN, we do a lot of work simultaneous with the specification in order to prove that the specification is actually implementable. And sometimes that has actually helped us with the actual specification process and identifying gaps early on in the specification development. So the problem is though, is that you need to maintain IPR, okay? The IPs that go in, because we have FRAND license and stuff like that are associated with that. So the way it works is that when a bug or defects is found, the individual companies that are members of the SDO, okay, need to come back with a contribution following the process of the SDO for that contribution. It's usually very straightforward because it's an error correction, and those are the easiest ones to submit. And so it's putting that back into the pipeline, follows the normal process, therefore also obeying all IPR rules that are within the SDO.
Okay. Kind of like a bug fix when you want to get involved in a,
that's right.
in a project, get started. And
you want to get it started, you want to get it done, but at the same time, to get it into the standard. After it gets out in the standard, you have to do a true up in the open source. Every release, you do a true up to the latest release. If your bug wasn't fixed, but it was changed, you have to readapt, or if it wasn't fixed due to whatever, then you have to pull it forward and in order to keep moving the software forward. Unless it's been rejected, in which case then that's a whole different problem.
yeah, okay.
I mean, the only comment I'd make on that, and maybe this is just my personal experience, is sometimes software groups can kind of fix an interoperability problem between themselves and then they think that's solved the problem, and they don't necessarily always report it back to the sort of SDO. And I think creating that mindset and the culture where we report these back to the SDO is really important.
The problem with that becomes then interoperability and conformance. If one software comes up with a solution that is deviant from it, then unless everybody adopts the deviance, then you don't have interoperability. So the right mindset is get it corrected into the standard, get it published as an actual artifact consumable by them so they can take it without modification. The goal is without modification. Therefore, everybody is developing to the same standard, and therefore we should have interoperability.
Very well made points. Shimada-san, do you want to have any thoughts from your side on how you're adapting in your agencies?
Yeah, actually, I feel like I'm just only one person outside of the specification world. So let me introduce our initiative of the funding and the incentive and the other activity with the international collaboration. So can I?
Yes, so you're going to jump ahead and talk about your funding and incentives for vendors.
Yeah, so we are currently...
Tell you what, hold that thought. We'll come back to that, but let's just see if Dr. Kim, do you have any thoughts on this topic of how open source development can work more elegantly with standards development?
Actually, in my memory, in 10 years ago, we on M2M standardization at that time, we discussed that kinds of the relationship between the open source and the standardization. But I fully understand what you had good points, some about the open spec is also we need to consider that kinds of issues in stage of standardization. Actually, TT is also now considering that kind of issue internally, but already the ATIS made some software working group, but TT is now is on the stage where and we need to solve that kinds of problem in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on, I'm just going to see if anyone has a question or comment. You know, the person I'm looking at, I'm going to just ask Adrian Scrace to comment a little bit in the back there. If you wouldn't mind, Adrian, just because you have a lot of experience in the SDO world, just give us your thoughts from your long experience. Have you seen this change? Well, I guess it's since you left ETSI and 3GPP, really. But just give us your thoughts on the topic overall.
On the topic of software.
open source software development and how that interfaces with standards.
First of all, thank you for putting me on the spot. I mean, we've lived through many years of this, and certainly from an ETSI point of view, I'd echo what Iain has said, that for a number of years now, we've been puzzling with this whole issue of how do you work from pro standards to software and back again. And I think we've made tremendous progress in that direction. I think we understand the complexity of it. It's now down to the willingness of the communities to actually make it work. So I think even with the software copyright licenses, I think we've got so much experience now, at least from an ETSI point of view, we know how to address that issue. And again, it's down to the community. If they want to make it work, it will work. But coming back to some of the earlier points on this panel, I think this is very much related to the fragmentation discussion. And I do have my own personal concerns that, as you rightly said, Gabriel, work is being done in different places. It's being developed in different places. Software components might be developed in different places. How can we be sure that when it all comes together, it will actually work in an interoperable way? But all credit to industry that's actually trying to make this work. Maybe we were expecting things to happen a little quicker, but industrial reality is that we're working at the pace we can work at. But I think 6G gives you a real opportunity to try and bring some of this together in a much more coherent way from both an organizational point of view and from a technical point of view.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I knew you'd handled it with aplomb. Was the gentleman there next to you, did you have a comment, or as being one of the...
Yeah, so I just had a question. So with the movement to more of the network function virtualization and the softwareization of network functions, how do you see methods like fuzz testing playing into probably this forwards and backwards? So fuzz testing just as a very popular penetration and testing method to essentially just determine what are the edge cases where implementations don't work. Do you see this being a part of testing and integration in the future for 6G or?
Familiar with that.
Good question. I'm going to land that one on Iain to deal with. I think it's a little bit the same question, isn't it, in a way?
I mean, I think fuzz testing is a known technique for trying to find security vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with the point that actually Rob Soley from AT&T made in his comments in the earlier panel, that if you actually look at the way ORAN is deployed, it's in a quite structured environment, so it's not necessarily exposed to all the same risks as, for example, software that's going to sit on the public internet is. But I think as we increasingly bring together different combinations of software, then we will have to sort of introduce this much more, I guess, skeptical view of security, to call it that, where we really assume that we're dealing with actors that do not have good intentions when we try to integrate software. So I think it has a role, but I think it's kind of, from my point of view, it's in the details of how we specify the security piece.
Sure, I understand. I apologize for the redundancy. Again, trying to graduate.
No worries, thanks. To be honest, as well, when he said the young people in the industry, there aren't that many in the audience here, so I was kind of like, thank you. Let's go, we've got 4 minutes left. Shimada-san, you had some input on funding and incentives. Of course, that is certainly for smaller vendors, but not only. It's a very important piece of moving ORAN on. Tell us what you're doing there in Japan then in terms of supporting the industry.
Yeah, so actually from this session discussions, my main statement is very different from the about making the specification or something like that. But so we are now promoting open and deployment into the world. Currently, ongoing collaboration is still ongoing. So after some government was changed. So for example, the February 7th, my Prime Minister, Ishiba, met the President Trump at the Washington, D.C. And as a result of the joint statement, that joint statement including the reaffirming the importance of the Open RAN. So, not only the US and Japan, the other countries still think the open RAN deployment is very important policy goals. So we are conducting the funding to some pilot project, especially from the Japanese government. So we are especially focusing on the ASEAN countries. So we already conducted the Philippines, Cambodia, and Indonesia. And the other ASEAN countries, we conducted the financial support of the pilot study, a pilot field trial in India, Kenya, Ukraine. So we are promoting the open RAN by providing the financial support as a catalyst of the private sector's investment. So, so this kind of funding is not so popular. So we want to let you know we are providing this kind of financial support of conducting the third countries. So anyway, so we are very taking importance on the collaboration with the private sectors. So I'm very happy to have a further collaboration with the team here.
Thank you. Yeah, a good contribution in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, obviously a lot of things are changing in the US when it comes to public issues, but at least in my understanding, the US funding for the Wireless Innovation Fund, and they have this Notice of Funding Opportunity, the NOFO 3, coming out on increasing Open RAN and softwareization. I think that program seems to be surviving and continuing, so I think that we will also see, similar to what we heard from Japan, really, government support for private sector innovation related to Open RAN coming from the US.
Super interesting to see the links between industrial policy and all the rest of industry, whether that's standards or software development or whatever. It's quite an integrated picture. With that, we're going to close the session. We've got one more after this, but before that, please join me in thanking our 4 panelists.